Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. I'm Tom Keene, along with Paul Sweeney. Join us each day for insight from the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app. The annual Payrolls benchmark revision. Sarah Hunt is in equities, and she's focused on this economics. Why are you focused on this payroll revisions if you're running stocks?
Well, if you look at what's been going on for the last year, one of the big things that people have been excited about is the labor market has stayed strong. And this has given the Fed room to not cut rates because the economy has stayed strong. And if this turns out, and there have been a lot of discussions about which of the various labor ways you should look at this are correct, if there's a big downward revision, then that labor story starts to take a little bit off and people really start to worry again about the consumer, because if you have a job, you're willing to spend, and if you don't, you're not. So I think that there's a big question about how that plays out.
Atlanta GDP is coming down. It was 2.x, boom economy, solid economy. Maybe it's down to 2%. Is there a point where in the equity space, we become more like Macy's and not Target, where GDP and consumer pulse gives way to moldy earnings? I
think that's the big concern, right? Because what you've seen out of the sort of discount retailers, if you will, is good numbers. And Target had a lot of problems coming out of the pandemic with an inventory issue, and it took them some time to work through that, and now they're back on track. But with Macy's, it's hard to tell if it's just Macy's, but if that middle consumer is really starting to feel the pinch on both sides, I think you start to worry about earnings, and that becomes a question with equity levels where they are.
We had some. I think the earnings coming out of the second quarter were pretty solid. What did you take away from the second quarter earnings and maybe some of the forecast going forward?
Well, I'm going to give a big plug to Tom Keene's Corporations Will Adapt.
Yes,
and they did adapt.
Is Sparta listening?
No.
She's probably up at 92.9.
Yes.
In Boston.
Working on that.
Working
signal.
on the painting, getting the curtains in correct,
sure.
And all that. Because after Labor Day, we're on a big new single up in Boston.
I know, it's huge.
Did you hear she said that? That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so, continue. Our earnings, what's your takeaway?
Well, I think that the big concern, and it was a concern that we shared, quite honestly, was that margins were going to have a problem as inflation came down, because if margins were accelerating because of inflation and corporations were capturing that, then they were going to see a bit of a margin squeeze. So far, that has yet to materialize. And in fact, the expectation for margins going into 2025 and the back half of 2024 are pretty decent.
Okay.
So that's where your earnings have been able to be okay. The question is if the top line starts to get affected even more, that could be an issue.
Is your analysis narrow and sector specific and even within sectors, or is it more holistic about the market?
Well, the numbers that I was just talking about are more holistic about the market, but if you look at certain sectors, that's where also technology has really carried
healthcare
in a lot of places. Healthcare has been a little bit problematic coming out of the pandemic, but it's starting to work better and it's starting to do okay. I think the insurers had great numbers coming out because nobody was utilizing healthcare for a while. So the question is what's going to happen to them as utilization starts to pick up. But I think in general, the question about margins has been a lot less, has been more benign than people expected.
Lisa, is my Botox, is that utilizing healthcare?
That doesn't count. No.
That doesn't count. Paul, save me here.
All right, Sarah, where do we go here coming out here? This earnings, we've got a Fed that presumably is going to be cutting rates. We've got decent earnings. Do we just stick with the Magnificent Seven? Do we try to get a little bit more creative out there? Do we look for value in sectors outside the Mag 7?
Well, some of the catch-up in the last week has actually been on the S&P equal weight, so that tells you that market has broadened out a bit, so it's not just the Magnificent Seven. I think that downdraft in technology was bought pretty quickly. It was the balance of the market that took a couple more days, but you really have seen, it's almost like the beginning of August never happened, right? Mm-hmm. So there was a very quick snapback there, and I think that as long as you can see, corporations are still spending money. There's plenty of cash out there. It does look pretty good, but if you start to see things really slow down on the margin, the question is where the valuations are now. Can they stay there or can they go further? What's your next leg up?
But the heart of this, and I'm going to cite Goldman Sachs, but I'm not sure that, folks. I don't have it in front of me. there seems to be a model from 6% revenue growth down to 4% revenue growth. David Kostin, like me, taking this off of nominal GDP. Can your world work successfully with nominal GDP giving you 4% revenue growth?
Oh, I think it absolutely can. And in the
people younger, Sarah, don't agree with this. I mean, you were 19 when we were doing this, but the answer is there was a time where nominal was there.
Yes, and I think that there was also, again, it is such an unusual situation to have gone through a global pandemic that the fits and starts and the actual numbers and how fast things are increasing are harder to put into a historical context when you have such a giant downdraft. I mean, I think that's part of the problem with the labor market. And one of the reasons that people are concerned about the revisions is because we're working off a lot of models that are hypothetical, that show a birth-death model for businesses and everything else. And I think that that's really difficult to parse when you go through such a big historic change.
Fixed income, 2-year treasuries, I'm at 4%. That's fine for me, but should I take some more credit risk?
Well, I think the difficult thing is now is that you know that the Fed is going to start cutting rates. They pretty much telegraphed that that's going to happen. And whether or not they do it in a big chunky fashion, which I don't expect them to do, we know that those short-term rates are coming down. So sure, you can take 4% on a 2-year, but you're not. It's going out further. That's the question. And credit spreads are still very compressed. Okay. So that means that taking that credit risk, you're not getting paid as much as you would have in any kind of with a little bit more uncertainty. So it's a little difficult, but I think that having some fixed income now finally is part of the portfolio.
All right, we're sending Tom Keene and Lisa Abramowicz out to Jackson Hole today. So they're going to get ready for this whole thing. What are they going to hear when they go out there, do you think?
Well, I think a lot is going to depend on what happens today with those revisions, because whether or not they have to talk about that or not talk about that is going to be a big issue. But I also think that it's been telegraphed, like I said, pretty well, that unless the data goes in the opposite direction and or you see a spike in inflation, we can start to expect to see rates come down. And I think that's going to be, if we don't do much else except deal with that, I think that's probably going to be what they're targeting.
So, I mean, I think the issue here for a lot of investors, Sarah, is, I mean, I've had a pretty good year so far. I mean, can't I just take my money and just put it under the mattress for the rest of the year? What do I do here?
Well, you could, unless you did it for a living, in which case people wouldn't really appreciate that.
Oh, we're paying you to do this. I forgot. We're paying you to do this.
I think, I mean, we've been pretty happy with our positioning thus far this year. That downdraft was so fast, nobody really changed very much because it was such a quick up and down. I think that what people are looking for is what's going to happen into 2025. What's going to happen as we go through the end of this year. This year looks pretty good. What's going to happen next year? We've got an election. There's some uncertainty there.
It's a general statement. I don't see exuberance within broader society. For stocks, I can't believe I'm saying this, it futures 41,025 on the Dow. I don't sense, am I wrong?
No, I think that there is a real question of like, okay, we bounce back for all this. All these things happen. Where are we right now? And how much money do I want to put to work immediately? If I was starting a brand new portfolio, I would probably do that in stages because I'm not sure, given some of the uncertainties that we're seeing, why you would put 100% in it on day one, given that the equity markets are where they are. Which doesn't mean that they're completely overvalued. It just means that we're not in the middle of a downdraft. We had a correction. We turned around and came right back to close to all-time highs.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much. Sarah Hunt, thank you for being with us. Alpine Woods Capital. Joining us now, Annmarie Hordern from Chicago, reporting as she always does wonderfully on the politics of the nation, in this case of a Democratic flavor. Open question, Annmarie, to start. How's the energy in Chicago different from any other convention you've attended?
Well, look, I think there was a ton of energy at the RNC as well, especially that evening that Trump came out to give his performance. I was on the convention floor, and it was electric to the people in the room. The man had just literally dodged a bullet. There was an attempt on his life, and then he comes out and explains all of that in depth to his supporters, and almost gave a sermon. But since then, a month later, this election has changed drastically, and there is fresh energy and momentum in this Democratic Party. Kamala Harris is drawing crowds that Joe Biden was unable to do for the past year.
In 15 minutes scheduled, there's going to be the Hispanic Caucus meeting. What does Vice President Harris want out of the Hispanic caucus meeting?
Well, she wants them to be energized to get voters out in places like Arizona and Nevada, which now are in play for this Democratic Party. And these are states that she is going to be visiting. And she needs to do that because one issue that's close to a lot of these people in these states is the border. And President Donald Trump will be in Arizona at the border on Thursday, wanting to counter-program the rhetoric and the policies we were hearing out of the DNC. He really wants to try, or his campaign wants him to try, to focus on the issues, and that's one of them. So when she speaks to people like the Latino or Latinx coalition, it's about this, making sure they can run up these numbers in these states.
Annmarie, what is the expectation about the Democrats' positioning for down-ballot races? I've seen some reporting over the last couple of days that the momentum that Kamala Harris has generated so far since entering the race as the top candidate will maybe impact down ballots. What's the thinking on the floor there in Chicago?
Well, this is one of the reasons why when President Biden recently sat down with CBS this morning, he talked about that's one of the reasons why he decided to leave the race. He saw that the data he saw, the information he was given was that it was affecting his colleagues in Congress. There's been a lot of anecdotes about this. You have someone like Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan trying to claim that seat, trying to move from the lower chamber to the upper chamber. In a leaked report to the New York Times about a phone call she had with donors, she was talking about the fact that the issue she was facing was that with Trump on top of the ticket, with Biden on top of the ticket versus Trump, it was hurting her chances. Now there's renewed momentum down ballot that Kamala Harris can help pick some of these people up in very, very tough, a very tough map in terms of Democrats trying to hold the Senate and also trying to win back the House.
Annmarie, the script is you do the polarity at the conventions and then you run to the center. When does the run to the center? Mr. Trump, I guess, is sort of unique because he's going to do what he wants to do. But for the Democrats, as an example, when do they shift to a center tendency?
I think they're trying to do that now.
Really?
They are balancing who is speaking. Yeah, they're balancing who is speaking at this convention. When you heard from Michelle and Barack Obama yesterday, it is this message about how this could be a ticket for every Americans. They are trying to lean into this idea, and Libby Cantrell was on Surveillance this morning talking about this idea of vibes and personality. Right. They're trying to reenact what happened in 2008. The issue is they have a very short runway. Potentially, they can do this because they have a very short runway and don't need to go into detail in some of their policy proposals that maybe some in the middle would not be excited to vote for.
All right. One final question. Can you get out to Cubs Tigers at 8 p.m. tonight? Can you sort of, do the Annmarie Hordern act and then slide out to Wrigley Field to take in 3 innings? No one will miss you.
I think it'll be a little bit difficult tonight, given the fact that Governor Walz will be giving his speech, accepting his VP nomination. And also, Speaker Pelosi, which, Tom, I got to say, the line that struck me last night at the DNC was when Governor Newsom said he's coming from the great state of Nancy Pelosi. That's how he introduced California when he was calling up the end of the roll call. And in many ways, this feels like this is her convention, a totally different convention we are having now than we were planning a month ago. Okay, I'm going to go see Dansby Swanson. You can deal with the politics. Annmarie Hordern, thank you so much. They're really great color reporting, in reporting. I mean, she's tough. William Lee. Bill Lee's chief economist, the Milken Institute. Bill, I don't know if you're up to speed on this, but basically Ford came out and said today their EV strategy is not working, billions of losses. China completely dominates. There's a foreign affairs article this month. It's literally in my suitcase, folks, on the way to Jackson Hole. Bill Lee, the Chinese EV strategy, how does America compete against that?
It's going to be really tough, Tom. The Chinese have so dominated in their production of EVs. The state subsidies have made them so good at producing EVs. Their efficiencies are just better than anybody else right now. In fact, that's why you see Elon Musk over there, because he really has taken advantage of not only the state subsidies, but also he's brought his own technology there. So the way you compete, I think, is to sort of join them. But that's true for a lot of these new energy industries, electric photos, electric, solar cells and battery and electric vehicles.
So, Bill, a lot of investors, Western investors, got exposure to China through some of the big tech companies, like an Alibaba, for example. And a lot of those folks who financed a lot of the growth for China technology, I think they feel like China's uninvestable now, given what the government has done to not only technology, but other parts of the economy. What's your view to those, or how do you respond to those types of folks?
That's a great point, Paul. If you're already in China, like a Citibank, JP Morgan, even a Tesla, you can put more money in because you know exactly what you're getting into. You know the deals that you're getting into. You know the kind of market that you're going into, and you have a niche product. If you're a new investor, and a lot of our sponsors at Milken have talked about, how do you get into China now? If you're not able to do the due diligence to find out exactly what it is that you're getting into, especially a dynamic market like China, where the domestic market itself is not growing as rapidly as you thought it would have just a few years ago. Not only is the demographic situation dismal, but their near-term situation is really a problem because they aren't able to bring the amount of stimulus to aggregate demand that they really need to stimulate the economy and get growth going. Right. And part of that problem is because they're so heavily indebted. The size of the fiscal stimulus they need to bring is limited by the huge amount of debt that they have, not only at the general government level, but more importantly at the provincial level. Because as Tom, as you know, when you go into a deal with China, a lot of the deals are made with provincial governments. But now those guys are so heavily indebted, they can't make the kind of deals they used to make.
Billy, I look at the currency movement here. And folks, I can't emphasize enough the persistency of trend of, for example, Singapore dollar strength, literally over 20 years. Now we have finally a legitimate dollar weakness. For Bill Lee of the IMF and of Milken, is it a legit weakness or is it just a wobble along the way of selected Pacific Rim strength?
It reflects the shifting positions of these two economies, and in some ways, it represents the success of these currencies, both in Asia and the shift in the United States, where so much of our manufacturing prowess has really moved out of the United States, and that's what all of these CHIP Acts and all these U.S. subsidies are about, to try to bring back some of these jobs and reshore, or at least to friendshore, some of these supply chains. But again, we have to talk about the apparent historical success versus the prospective success going forward. Will China continue to be the super growth market? Will Asia continue to be the super growth market? For the latter, yes. It's very clear that given the demographics in ASEAN and India, there's a huge advantage and growth potential there. For China, not so clear. And as I said, the debt problem is really a huge problem for them, especially at the local level. And it's the off-balance sheet debt, the local government financing vehicles, as they call them.
What do the EM central bankers, or for that matter, the managing director Georgieva of the IMF, what do they want from Chairman Powell at Jackson Hole?
I think the one thing they want from the United States is a stability of policy and consistency of policy. You can't have the kind of database strategy that is so data dependent that you can't say how we're targeting inflation, whether we're going to be continuing to subsidize certain industries to try to attract them back on board. I think the foreign companies, as well as foreign governments and our own government, our own domestic companies, are looking for our government to be much more consistent in our policies.
Billy, thank you so much with Milken. And the front page is, of course, Lisa Mateo, Lisa Mateo.
All right, so the U.S. Open begins next week, right? The fever's already starting, but the Wall Street Journal is saying that Americans are going to have more to cheer about because 5 U.S. men, 5 U.S. women, they're ranked in that top 20 for the first time since 1997. So for the women, you have Coco Gauff, right? And number 3. She wants to defend her U.S. Open women's singles title. You have Jessica Pegula's another one there. Danielle Collins, Emma Navarro, Madison Keys. And then on the men's side, you have Ben Shelton. He's 13th in the world. Taylor Fritz, Tommy Paul, Sebastian Corda, Francis Tiafoe. He's a semifinalist in the U.S. Open in 2022. But the last time, this is what I thought was interesting, that they had at least 5 men and women ranked in the top 20 was October 1996. Pete Sampras was the number 1 men's player.
Whoa,
so that's when it was.
That's going back.
And Monica Seles was the top ranked female player. Yep. So that's how long it's been.
I feel fortunate to have seen Forest Hills and really lived it.
Yep.
It was magical. I went out to the Open a couple years ago to see Emma Raducanu, and there's just too many people. It was just, they could like take 1,000 or 2,000 people away, and
to me, I'm going next Tuesday.
Ooh.
So I won't be here, kids, because I'm going to be the first Tuesday of the tournament every year. It's the best day to go out there. And they process all these people, I think, very, very well.
They do. Fair.
And I think the U.S. Open is a quintessential New York City event. It's just, it is one of the greatest things in New York City, I think. So I'll be out there next Tuesday.
You know who's going to be there too? Carol Massar, Tim Stenovic. They're reporting live there Thursday, Friday.
Of course they are. They're stars. So, they get the good stuff.
They get to go there.
You know, Alex Steele and I, we go to like
what are we, Chuck?
Memphis. You know, and they get the U.S. Open. I get it. It's Carol Massar.
You and I are at the Dunkin' Donuts at 24 and 495, and they're at the Open with Coco. Next.
I'm not sure if you've been to an ATM lately that's not in your network. If you notice how much they're charging you now.
Yeah,
for those
please.
fees.
Thank you.
Okay, so Bankrate did this study. Those fees are at the highest rate. $4.73 is the average, but some people have paid more. Atlanta actually gets the highest fees, so when you go out of network. The good news that Bankrate did find is that overdraft fees are the lowest in nearly 2 decades. So, but the thing is that about 91% of the banks that they surveyed still charge the overdraft fees, so you're still kind of battling Lisa, part of it.
I mean, you have to have, here we go, folks. This is how you roll. You get a big wad of cash. That's how you do it. The kids don't do that anymore, do they?
No.
They don't have cash.
No, I have to admit, I don't really carry cash either.
Please.
I know.
So you go to Jersey
then you
Shore,
can Venmo people.
Yeah.
Like, it's just
I think
easy.
of Bernie Sanders last night talking at the Democratic National Convention. I totally get the overdraft charge. Like bad. You have no money.
It's a business.
In your account. Great. But the bank thing, from a marketing standpoint, to go up to another bank where I may someday do business,
right?
And they're taking $3 from me, is insane.
More.
I don't get it.
No,
I don't. I just there's no reason. There's no
and I'll drive farther just to find my bank.
Yes,
sometimes.
exactly.
Does Costco do they have ATMs at Costco for you?
They do. Actually, they do have ATMs
next to the hot dog place. They charge you $2 for the ATM fee, while you pay them $1.50 for the hot dog.
This one I find interesting. This is in the Wall Street Journal. A lot more people now are getting hip and knee replacements younger. So younger and younger, because they don't want to give up skiing, hiking, pickleball. They're more active in their 50s, 60s. Obesity on the rise. That extra weight puts more pressure on your joints. So they found that patients ages 45 to 64, a 211% increase in hip replacements, 240% increase in knee replacements. That's between 2007 and 2017. So more people are getting these surgeries. The technology is, of course, better. But yeah, they want to stay active.
That used to sideline people for months.
They don't want to be in the sidelines.
Now you can get right back up on that stuff.
No.
So all right.
That's like my mom. She's going for surgery. She wants to keep playing tennis.
Is that right? Good for mom.
73.
I don't know. I have a friend, Carl, who wanted to extend his NHL career. He's looking at Chris Chelios when he played for the Red Wings. Carl, and he got both hips done, both knees, both this, and he's great.
And he feels good? Okay.
You should see him. He back checks like nobody I know. He comes back down the ice. He's up somewhere in Happy Land in New Hampshire. And, he back checks like a 25-year-old. I don't know how he does it. He's got fake hips, fake knees, fake this, fake that.
It all works.
And he literally back checks like a 25-year-old in hockey.
There you
Next,
go.
what do you
Maybe
got?
that's the key. And speaking of which, people living longer, the world's oldest person has passed away. 117 years old. Can you believe it? 117. Her name is Maria Brañas Morena. She's an American-born Spanish woman, and she has this huge following on social media. Of course she does. She's called the Super Catalan Grandma. So that's her handle. Everybody loves her. But she says, she was asked in past interviews, what's the secret? What's the secret to living longer? And she says she doesn't really do anything special. She didn't smoke. She likes to eat yogurt. Damn. Ding, ding, ding. There you go.
You're kidding me.
She does moderate exercise. But she had no indication of cancer, anything, never showed signs of dementia.
Wow. Born
what a life.
March 4th, 1907 in San Francisco, facing dire straits, the family returned to Spain when Miss Brañas was a child. On the boat to Spain, her father died of tuberculosis. These stories back from the day are unbelievable.
Yeah. She went out and got married, 3 kids, more than a dozen grandkids. So
there she lived through the country's civil war and the brutal Franco regime. She had clear memories of the D-Day invasion at Normandy, she told the Spanish newspaper.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Yep. This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, bringing you the best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. You can also watch the show live on YouTube. Visit the Bloomberg Podcast channel on YouTube to see the show weekday mornings from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern from our global headquarters in New York City. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen, and always on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Terminal, and the Bloomberg Business app.